The Apostle Paul in the book of 1 Corinthians says that our present understanding of God is like looking into a frosted or a dark glass. And when you do that, like this morning at 7 o'clock, it was dark outside at 7 o'clock this morning, and I came over here to the chapel to get ready and practice my sermon and such. And so you look out there and you can see shapes, basic shapes and such like that. And here comes a figure, somebody walking. And I can't make that person's face out, but I know just by the way that person is walking, it's Boyd. So I'm not worried, it's Boyd. You can tell it's Boyd. But I couldn't be 100% sure because, I can pick out outlines, but I can't make out a lot of details. Now, I want you to think about some times in your life when you've made an effort to seek God, but maybe it felt like you were looking through a dark glass. That's what Paul says that it's like when we are trying to figure out who God is. We can pick up some general shapes and outlines, but the details sometimes are shrouded in the unknown. Well, I want to welcome you to Epiphany Sunday, because this is the last time that we gather together as a church to formally celebrate Christ's birth. Now, the word Epiphany comes from the Greek language, and it means appearance or revelation. And it's most often used to speak of either an appearance of a divine being or the revelation of a divine truth. Now, that's how we get this word associated with light, something that reveals something that happens in comic strips sometimes as an artist draws a light bulb over a character's head when that character comes up with an idea or sees something for the first time. It's suddenly made clear. Somebody will say, "Hey, I had an epiphany." And the idea is that it illuminates whatever it is that's in front of them, whether it's an idea or a truth that's in front of them. The church celebrates Epiphany as the revelation of God's nature and purpose in the appearance of Christ. So today, in the relative darkness of winter, we come to God seeking an epiphany. We are asking God to draw a light bulb over our heads. We're asking God to pull back that darkness and step into the light so that if even only for a moment, we can clearly see that love that God has for us and the purpose which God has set before us. We are looking for an epiphany. Now, the church traditionally celebrates Epiphany by telling the story of the Magi, or the wise men who traveled from the east to visit and worship the Christ child. Remember, there are only two Gospels. Two of the four Gospels tells the story of the birth of Jesus. We have Luke and his Gospel, and we have Matthew. Now, Luke has shepherds, Matthew has wise men. It's the church that has kind of crammed them all together because we get this idea of this crowded little stable where Luke's shepherds, usually, 2 or 3 or 4, and Matthew's wise men, always 3, even though Matthew never says how many there were, and they're all standing in line to see the baby Jesus. And you might say, wait, what do you mean? There's 3 wise men. Matthew says it. No, Matthew does not say that. Matthew says there are 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We don't know how many wise men there were. There were at least 2 because it's plural, but who knows? There could have been 8, 13, 22 wise men. Who knows? But that's not the important thing. What's important to Matthew is that Matthew says Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the land of Judea during the time of Herod the Great's rule there. But he doesn't say why Mary and Joseph were so far away from home in Nazareth. Now, Luke says that they were there because it was a census that Caesar had called for, but Matthew doesn't give us anything other than the location. Now, this was really important for Matthew's audience because Matthew's audience was mainly Jewish. And these folks knew their scriptures forward and backwards. So they could tell you for sure that the Messiah was going to come from the family of King David, the family lineage of King David, and from the city of David, which was and still is Bethlehem. And so Matthew makes sure his readers cannot miss the fact that Jesus came from exactly where the Messiah was expected to come from. And Matthew's just like that. See, he likes to give his readers something comfortable to hang on to before he hits them with a big reveal. So, he gets them feeling nice and safe and secure with their cherished Hebrew presuppositions. And then when you least expect it, bam! He hits them with the big surprise. And he doesn't waste any time here in his gospel. He just comes right out and says it. He says, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star rise in the east, and we have come to worship him. Now to us, that sounds pretty reasonable. It doesn't sound too terribly strange at all, because, we're familiar with this story. But to a proudly righteous Jew from the first century who followed the law and the prophets to a T, this is bizarre and scandalous. They'd hear this story and they'd say, now wait, who came to Jerusalem? Magi from the east? See, the label Magi could have had a number of slightly different meanings, but none of them would sound right to a devout Jew of the time. At its most basic, innocent, wooden definition, Magi refers to those who possess supernatural knowledge or abilities. A magus, is a wise one whose special knowledge comes from reading the stars or from other mystical means of divination that are inaccessible to just ordinary person. Think of Doctor Strange, if you've ever seen that movie. In other words, a sorcerer, which isn't a good thing because in Jewish tradition, the law of Moses says no sorcerers. In fact, in Deuteronomy 18:10-12, it says, no one shall be found among you who makes a son or daughter pass through fire, or who practices divination, or is a soothsayer, or a sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or who consults with ghosts or spirit, or who seeks oracles from the dead. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord. It is because of such abhorrent practices that the Lord your God is driving them out before you. So there you have it. Okay? So knowing this, try for a moment to get a feel for the kind of impact Matthew's words had on this devoutly Jewish audience. Let me, in fact, help you by telling you a modern-day parable, just to help you figure out how weird it sounded to them. So, here we go. Once upon a time, God decided to become a human being and be born into a baby boy on earth. He was born on a Saturday night to a couple of street kids named Joe and Mary who were camping out in the lawn shed behind the First Methodist Church in Chico, California. The next morning, all the regulars turned up for Sunday worship, completely unaware of this young couple in the garage out back. And halfway through the service, 5 strangers walked into the sanctuary. Notice I didn't say 3. 5's just an arbitrary number, okay? 5 strangers walked into the sanctuary, and they looked like they just got out of the Healing Arts Festival and Psychic Fair in Sacramento, okay? They were all dressed up in robes and loose-fitting beach yoga harem-looking clothes, and they had lots of jewelry with strings of crystals around their necks. They said, "Excuse us, but we're from the East Side Mythic Reality New Age Enlightenment Center, And we're looking for the godchild who was born somewhere around this area. And the startled regulars at the church said, "What are you talking about?" Well, we're not sure about the exact details, but Sister Harmony over here was reading the tarot cards this morning, and the cards clearly said that an omnipotent divine presence had just appeared as a baby near the location. And we were a bit surprised at first, but then our brother Star Fox over here spent half an hour calculating the astrological chart for today, and sure enough, there was an unusual conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter last night, and because it was occurring under the sign of Capricorn, well, that confirms what Sister Harmony's card said. So, we've come with a big supply of healing crystals and essential oils for the baby. And at that moment, a baby's cry was heard from the shed out back. And when they all went to investigate, there was Joe, Mary, and a baby that they had named Jesus. I know that sounds ridiculous, of course. And if you want to get technical, in biblical times, the Magi probably visited Jesus when he was a toddler, not a newborn baby. But still, you get the feel of how the people of Matthew's time might have felt upon hearing this news. They'd want to know what in the world was going on, because the use of any form of divination, astrological or otherwise, had long been forbidden in their religion. Now, the more specific meaning of the word magi refers to the priests of either Persian or Babylonian religions. These priests were the speakers of the sacred words of pagan sacrifices. Again, we're talking a magician or a sorcerer. Magi were people whose activities were repeatedly condemned and prohibited throughout the Scriptures and were completely abhorrent to the people of Israel. But here's Matthew, the most kosher of the gospel writers, the most Jewish gospel writer, openly writing that Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Magi from where? Probably from Babylon or Persia, which is around where Iraq is. They would not be particularly welcome in this setting. It probably wouldn't be that much different from modern-day Iraqis wandering around downtown Jerusalem asking for directions to the local maternity hospital. It just looks a little fishy, right? Matthew's point, though, was pretty simple. Don't get your theology about who's in and who's out too carefully figured out, because God is famous for crossing boundaries and barriers and borders. God's love is not withheld from anyone in favor of anyone else. God's love respects none of our boundaries or borders. Now, here's the bad news and the good news about all of this. And yes, there is bad news. The bad news is that there will be times when we have no clue as to how God is going to reveal something to us. None whatsoever. Just when we think that we have God figured out, just when we think we know who God uses and who God doesn't use to reveal God's message, the light goes on. And we get surprised. God can be unpredictable in that way, which is terribly annoying, because when it comes to understanding God, we don't like surprises. Especially when they challenge some of the assumptions that we have about how things ought to be. There's good news, too. The good news is that God's desire to relate to us and to love us is bigger than we can imagine. We, as God's creation, are still loved passionately, even when things go embarrassingly wrong when it comes to our understanding of God and other people. So again, the good news and the bad news is that God is unpredictable. But we celebrate Epiphany in the church because we recognize the importance of those times when that light goes on and we see God's love revealed. And the truth that God's love respects no boundaries or borders is revealed, and wherever you are, whatever you've done, wherever you've come from, God loves you and longs to make that love known to you. So here we are at the very beginning of this brand new year, 2018. And my gosh, the first 7 days have already been exciting, right? So as we face this brand new year, may God's light shine on our paths this new year in ways that reveal God's love for all.